Hello. Okay, let's try again. Hello. Okay, just checking. English is fine, right? I mean, you have two choices, English or Italian. These are the only languages. Oh, we have one Italian over there. Okay, thank you for being here, and I'm very happy to be here. This is my first time in this conference, and actually it's my first time in Constance, and I really enjoyed the last 2 hours. I hope I'll have some time, I'll have more time to explore more. So, Agile Leadership. The reason why I like to talk about Agile Leadership is because that's what I've been working on, at least for the last 4 or 5 years. I've always worked independently as a coach or whatever, consultant, Agile coach. Today I define myself an enterprise Agile coach because I work at the enterprise level more than at the team level. But I've been working on this concept of Agile leadership for a long time because I think it's relevant to the kind of culture that Agile lives in. And I went through my own journey. I made my mistakes, I learned new things, and so on. So what I would like to share with you today is the way I look at Agile leadership today, these days, okay, after this long process. I'll be around tonight, and so if we're going to have beer, right? There's a beer party or something. Okay, of course, of course there is. Yeah. So I'll be around, and I'll be very happy if you have questions or if you have any feedback about what we're going to discuss in the next 40 minutes. So. Why is this called Rethinking Agile Leadership, and why do we have a set of colored glasses? I'll make that clear, I hope, in a second. First thing I want to do is to make a distinction between management and leadership. I stopped talking about managers and leaders a long time ago. I prefer to talk about management as a kind of activity and leadership as a different kind of activity these days. So first thing is I want to be sure that we understand what leadership means in this context, right? So we're talking about Agile leadership, not leadership in general. Leadership in general is a huge topic. We're talking about Agile leadership here. So as you can read there, I'm using the word of Seth Godin, and there are many definitions of management, but I like this one. You know, management is about manipulating resources to get a known job done. And by resources, we don't mean people, we mean any kind of organizational resource. And these could be time, money, infrastructure, partnerships, whatever, okay? Whatever is a resource that we manipulate, we handle to get a known job done that we call management. Okay? Leadership, then again, in the words of Seth Godin, which I like, is creating a change that you believe in. Leadership is about bringing change about. It's not necessarily about manipulating resources. You manipulate resources as a manager because you have the authority to do that. But as a leader, you might not have authority, but you can have influence. And influence is a completely different story. Managers have employees or direct reports, and leaders have followers, people who want to follow someone in a leadership position. They want to, they don't have to. It's a completely different story. So now that it's clear what is leadership in this context, let's move on. And let's talk for a second about companies and the way they work, at least two main forces in organizations. One, of course, is culture. And culture is defined as the set of values, beliefs, behaviors that define a specific, unique psychological character of that organization. That's the culture. And structure is everything else. Roles, hierarchies, policies, decision-making policies, and so on, and so on, and so on. Okay. Now, there is a debate going on, and the debate is structure created by culture, or is culture created by structure? And it's kind of an egg and chicken debate, because the two are clearly interrelated. For instance, in small startups, the culture defines the structure. But in large organizations, you might want to change the structure to influence the culture. So it depends, right? It's kind of an egg and chicken debate. I suggest that there is another level. I suggest that both culture and structure are created by human consciousness. So let me state this in another way. Companies do not exist in nature, right? Companies are not created by nature. Companies are created by the human mind. And therefore, the kind of mind that creates organizations determines both the structure and the culture of those organizations. So by consciousness, what I mean is the way, the set of colored glasses by which we perceive the world and therefore interpret the world and therefore react to the world. So our consciousness, the way we perceive and interact with the world, determines the kind of organizations that we know, both in terms of structure and culture. So for the sake of this discussion, just to have a vocabulary, I decided to use the work of Frederic Laloux. I don't know if you are familiar with this book, Reinventing Organizations. Very interesting book. The part that I like the most is the study that was conducted on the field on a dozen different organizations, trying to make sense of why these organizations perform so much better compared to their competitors. And these 12 organizations, they could be in the public or private sector, they could be small or big, they could be IT or non-IT, blah, 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 blah. So the study is very interesting. Also, Laloux uses previous models to kind of place what we are seeing into a larger context. And the context is the context of human evolution. So the idea is that the kind of organizations that we used to create 100,000 years ago were of a certain type. 10,000 years ago, they were of a different type. 1,000 years ago, they were of a different type. Now, as you might notice, this scale is not linear. Here you have, let me show you, because I know that the font is not that big. So here you have 100,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, 1,000, 100, 10 years ago, today. Okay? So the scale clearly is not linear. So it appears that there is an acceleration in the way we create organizations of new types. And these new types are placed on a color scale, this one, just to give you the clear idea that we are not, it's a kind of a continuous, movement shifting towards different kinds of consciousness. So what I'm going to do, I don't want to go too much into the details of the Laloux model, but I just want to use the Laloux work as a vocabulary to talk about Agile leadership. I want to use it just as a vocabulary. And I need to give you some information to understand this vocabulary. Just to be sure, how many people are familiar with the concept of Teal Organizations already? 1, 2, 3, maybe 4, maybe 5, 6. Okay, so for the rest of you, I'll give you a very, very quick introduction to different organizational paradigms. So, red organizations. When we say red organizations, we're talking about organizations that were created by a certain type of consciousness, organizations that are based on a certain paradigm, on a certain metaphor. In this case, in the case of red organizations, the metaphor, as you can see, is the pack of wolves. And the idea is very simple. In a red organization, you either dominate as the leader, as the boss, or you are dominated. Either you are the alpha leader or you are dominated. And it's very clear, very simple. It's a very clear division of labor, right? Now, you might think that organizations of this kind do not exist anymore, but if you look at street gangs, that's exactly how they work. In street gangs, there is one boss, and that boss is a boss because of his power and his ability to overcome other people. And that boss stays as boss until he's killed and replaced by the new boss. Okay? This is the way street gangs work. And street gangs are organizations. By definition, they are groups of people who share a common goal. That's an organization. right? Or tribal militia, and so on and so on and so on. Now, these kind of organizations, what they contributed to mankind was the concept of authority and the concept of division of labor, meaning that either I dominate or I am being dominated. So if I dominate, you do what I say, period. Okay? That's a very simple division of labor. Very, very simple, very basic, but it works. Amber organizations. The metaphor for amber organizations is the metaphor of the army. Now, I'm not talking about the military, especially the military today, because the military today, they do excellent things in terms of dealing with complex situations. They have concepts like commander intent or heuristics on the battlefield and blah, 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 blah. So they do excellent things in terms of dealing with complexity. I'm talking about the army in the sense of a very rigid hierarchy with clearly defined roles and responsibilities. Okay? I'm using this metaphor, like in the army. And we still see this kind of organization, like this was a church, right? Okay. Most churches, they are definitely amber. Most churches, they have a very rigid structure in terms of roles, very clearly defined responsibilities, and they perpetuate the past. They survive because they keep perpetuating the past. It's all about the process. Keep the same process, keep the same process. That's why we have so many rituals in churches. Keep the same process, keep the same process. Okay, stability. But even public school systems are very amber. Yesterday I was talking at the university, one of the colleges in Cambridge, and in a university. And if you think about it, universities today, they do wonderful things, but in terms of the internal organization of a university, is not very much different from 500 years ago. Universities today are still, for the most part, just as they were 500 years ago in terms of organizational structure. Because and in fact, they take pride in their history, right? They take pride in their history. So they perpetuate the past. These kind of organizations, what they contributed, what they added, because every paradigm adds to the previous one. So what Amber added to Red was the concept of hierarchies, a more finer division of labor, and clear processes. Now, let's move on. Orange organizations. Now, the metaphor for orange, first of all, it's very likely that you are working in an orange organization right now. Because today, I would say that 70–80% of the organizations, they are based on the orange paradigm. And the orange paradigm is the paradigm that we inherited from the Industrial Revolution. Is the paradigm that the organization is like a very efficient machine. The organization must run like a machine. It must be very goal-oriented, very efficient. And this is why, for instance, we measure individual people's performances. You have reviews or whatever, we measure people in the same way that we measure the performance of one of the parts of a machine. So what these kind of organizations brought into scene is the idea of accountability, because since I am measuring you, your individual performance, I hold you accountable for something. And then, for instance, if you meet your goal, then you will have a bonus or some kind of benefit, right? That's what happens usually. So I hold you accountable, and if you perform well, you're going to have a career advancement or more money or bonus or whatever. Okay, meritocracy. And they also brought into the scene the idea of innovation, because orange organizations are very much goal-oriented. Amber is process-oriented. Orange is project-oriented. Orange is about getting things done efficiently, which is what about 80% of organizations today are trying to do. Now, let's move on. Green organizations. Green organizations, the metaphor for green organizations is the metaphor of a family. meaning that you still have everything that was in the previous paradigms, because every paradigm includes the previous ones. So you still have authority, you still have division of labor, you still have processes, you still have hierarchies, but relationships are more important than hierarchies. And that's one of the more dominant traits of green organizations. Relationships are more important than processes and hierarchies and roles and so on and so on and so on. It's the way we stick together, and also the values by which we stick together makes a difference. Okay? We stick together because we share the same values as a group. And you can see that, for instance, in startups or even large organizations when they have a very strong value-based culture, like Amazon. You know? Remember Amazon? One of the mantras in Amazon is customer obsession. Okay, keep the customer happy, delight the customer. Okay, that's part of their culture, and that's what keeps them together, and that's also what makes the organization perform so well. So the breakthroughs that came with this kind of model were empowering. So empowering people because we trust people. Okay? As part of the family, I trust my family and I empower people. Or multiple stakeholders model, meaning that the organization is no longer goal-oriented, is more about making a lot of other people happy, not just those who pay the bill. Couple of notes before we move on with Agile. Please note that no organization, I've been oversimplifying when I've been talking about orange, red, green organizations, because no organization is monocolor, in the same way that no person can be monocolor. I can be very orange on the work, and I can be very red with sports, for instance. Okay, so no person and no organization is monocolor. And the other thing is, I mentioned that, but I want this to be very clear, every paradigm includes and enhances the previous ones, and no paradigm is inherently good or bad. Every paradigm was simply very well adapted to a specific context. It's context specific. It's not good or bad. So it's not a matter of, oh, we should all go green, or we should all go orange. It's not what bad or good. It's just what works in a specific context. Okay? And finally, Teal Organizations. Now, Teal Organizations in the Lelou model is the newest kind of organization that we can observe. And these are the paradigm for these kind of organizations is, well, we are not sure yet, but a lot of people are talking about ecosystems or living systems. They are organizations who are constantly changing, they're constantly interfacing, interacting with the larger system in which they operate. They try to have an evolutionary purpose. The organization asks itself the question, how can we serve our larger system better? And they keep asking this question, and they keep changing themselves, and they keep growing and adapting. So it's very much like a living system. In these kind of organizations, you see things like, for instance, a lot of self-management. I'll give you an idea. One of the organizations that were studied by Lelou is an organization in the Netherlands, and they take care of elderly people at home. Okay, so it's not a technological company. They take care of elderly people at home. In this organization, they have about 7,000 people on the field and 50 people in the headquarters. You have 50 people and 7,000 people on the field. Just imagine, for instance, an IT organization where you have 7,000 developers and 50 managers. Can you imagine that? Okay. It's clear that the people on the field, they know exactly what needs to be done. They are perfectly able to organize themselves in smaller groups, and they're perfectly able to self-manage themselves. They don't need much management. Okay? That's one thing. The other thing about Teal organization is wholeness. The idea that when you are on the work, on the job, you don't put on your usual professional mask that many of us put on when we go to work, but we bring all of our being at work, all of our skills and aspirations and emotions and whatever, so being whole as a person. Because in that way, you can contribute more and you can feel whole. And then evolutionary purpose I mentioned already. So, how does this relate to what we do in Agile? I'll give another example, which is closer to what we do. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Google's Project Aristotle. Okay, so it was an internal study that they conducted in Google for 2 years on 180 different teams. And the question they asked themselves was simply, okay, how come? I mean, we have hundreds of teams. Apparently, they all work in the same environment. So how come that certain teams perform so much better than other teams? How come? Okay. It was a reasonable question to ask. And initially, they investigated weird things like skills or bonuses or whatever. But eventually, after 2 years, they realized that what really makes the difference are those 5 things that you see there. So one is, for instance, clarity of goal and structure. When a team has a clear goal and knows exactly how they are supposed to work together, they perform better. Now, clarity of goal is orange, and structure is amber, if you remember. Dependability. I can trust my teammates. I know that if I am in trouble, my teammates will be there to support me. Very greenish, right? Personal meaning. Whatever we do, actually, whatever I do has to have a meaning for me, has to be meaningful for me one way or another. Maybe because I'm learning something, maybe because that's my contribution to the world, maybe because I like to be challenged, maybe because I like technology, maybe because, whatever. But it has to be a meaning for me. If it doesn't have a meaning for me, then I don't perform as much as I could. And that's very Teal, right? Wholeness, that's very Teal. Larger impact, definitely Teal. Larger impact means that the team needs to know why they're doing what they're doing. Who are the people who are going to be impacted by what they do? What's the purpose? What's the purpose of our work? Knowing that makes a big difference, and that's definitely Teal. Very Tealish, larger system. But all of this is irrelevant if the team does not have the thing on the top, if the team does not have psychological safety, which is basically living in an environment where you are not afraid to speak out your mind at any time. It could be because you have a suggestion, because you want to point out a problem, because you want to disagree, because you want to ask a question without looking stupid, and so on and so on and so on. If you are never afraid to speak out your mind in a team environment, you feel psychologically safe. And if you feel safe, you create better bonds. If you create better bonds, you create a better system. You create a larger, more functioning and functional organism, which is very Tealish. Let me give you another interpretation of what we do using this paradigm from Lulu. Let's take the values in the Agile Manifesto. Now, I'm going to make a couple of adjustments, just because, I highly respect the manifesto. It was wonderful. But just to make a couple of adjustments, since it's now 17 years old, okay? So one adjustment is this. Rather than work in software, I will just say work in product. Because as we know, Agile is no longer just in IT. We use Agile for a number of different things now. So what is important is that you deliver value in terms of a working product, even if that product is not software. And the other thing is stakeholders collaboration. It's not about collaborating with the person or the entity who pays you, the customer, but it's about collaborating with all stakeholders. if there is any UX person in this room, you know how important it is to interface with your actual users, which are one of your stakeholders, for instance. So a couple of adjustments made. Now, I want to play this game. Let's take, for instance, processes and tools. I asked myself, this is my opinion, you may disagree, and if you do, I'd be more than happy to talk about that, because I'm interested in your opinion. But let's take processes and tools. For me, processes and tools, they are processes, amber, tools, orange. The reason why tools are orange is because tools are a way to be more efficient and reach your goal more efficiently. So tools are about being efficient, orange. What's on the other side? Because the manifesto says that processes and tools are important, but individuals and interactions are even more important. So individual interactions, green and teal. Family and larger system. People and the way they relate to each other. Okay? My opinion, we can discuss about that, but just food for thought. Comprehensive documentation. Documentation is, as we know, the Bible, and the Bible is amber, right? On the other side, working product. If it is a product, if it must be working, it must serve someone, it must reach a goal, then it's orange. But it is also useful to someone, it has to have a meaning, and that's teal. Contract negotiation, a contract by definition is amber, and also it's a little bit of red. There's a little bit of red for a very simple reason. I don't know about you guys, but not all the time, but many times what I see in terms of contract negotiation is just a display of muscles. Like, I'm a big client, I have a bunch of money, you are just a supplier, I can find 10 more like you, so you do what I say. So, and you are being dominated and I dominate. Okay, that's very red, right? Stakeholder collaboration. Collaboration, stakeholder, larger system, teal and green, and then following a plan, amber, sticking to a plan, sticking to a process, that's amber. Responding to change, it's orange because this change is for this change you want to make because you have a goal to reach. Okay, that's the reason why we accept change, not because we like change, but because we understand that change gives us a competitive advantage. And that's why we accept change. And also because it benefits the larger system, that's teal. So, you see, I started about talking about 10,000 years ago. And now I'm starting to narrow my focus, and I'm talking more and more about what we do in Agile if you observe Agile and leadership from this perspective, which is just one perspective. This is just a model, right? Remember, all models are wrong and some is useful. Okay? Okay. This is just one of the possible models. Anyway, we're supposed to talk about leadership. So let's talk about leadership. If we accept this idea that Agile is kind of tealish, that means that it's virtually or mostly pointless to go through an Agile transformation or an Agile adoption if there is not a corresponding shift in consciousness. It's totally pointless to impose a teal, greenish way of working if the company's consciousness is still orange or amber. You just create friction. And I believe that many transformations fail because they don't see the mismatch between the organizational consciousness and the practices that we would like to introduce, which are of a different kind of consciousness. So what can we do? Who can make the change? Leaders. Remember what I told you at the beginning, when I told you management is about manipulating resources and leadership is about bringing about change. So leadership is one force that can shift the organizational consciousness towards something that is more fit for Agile. That's my point. Unfortunately, this also means that the persons, the people who are most influential in the organizations, like owners, founders, executives, the people who have the larger influence on the organization are the ones that are more, that need to be aware of this kind of responsibility they have. Because what Lalou suggests is that an organization can never evolve over the level of consciousness of their own leadership, which makes sense, right? And no organization can evolve over the level of consciousness of the most influential people in the organization. And the most influential people are the most influential leaders, not managers, leaders. I'm not talking about management, I'm talking about leadership. So in fact, you can say that management and leadership are two different forces for change in the organization. There are two different forces for change. I've seen excellent managers who were no leaders at all. I've seen excellent leaders that had no management position. But what is important, well, of course, it's also nice if this management and leadership force, they coincide on the same person. Sometimes that happens, and that's nice. When you have the enlightened CEO, okay, that's very nice. But if not, what is important is that you align these two forces in the same direction of change. They need to understand each other. Managers need to understand why they asked to do something like changing the team structure. So, nice if it isn't the same person, not always the case, but better to be aligned. Now, I'm going to go faster the next couple of slides because I want to save time to talk about, to share something you might find interesting, I hope. Anyway, I also want to make a distinction between the role of leadership in creating a shift in consciousness, because if you want to go teal, you don't have to, if you want to. Then it's all about inviting people to behave in a certain way. And that's the kind of leadership that we are looking for. Inviting people to behave in a certain way. Like, for instance, they develop practices, these kind of leaders, they create practices, something practical, actionable, that invite people to reclaim their own wholeness. But they are inviting people, okay? I cannot tell this lady, you be whole now. I order you. Okay, it's not going to work. But I can create the circumstances that invite her to behave in a different way. Agile leadership, on the other way, is about creating other leaders. For me, a good Agile, that's why we talk so much about servant leadership in Agile, which is a good thing. I mean, it's one of the things we talk about leadership when it comes to Agile. So servant leadership is a classical example of a green mindset, in my opinion. Because as a servant leader, you want to serve your circle. You want to serve your circle, your family. Okay? Which is a good thing, but there is more. There is more than serving your family. There is the larger system in which your family operates. So Agile leadership for me is all about creating other leaders. It's all about contextual leadership. It's all about being able to lead from time to time, being able to follow from time to time, being able to help people to take leadership positions from time to time. It's about create a network of people in which, as I say up there, okay, you invite multiple synergistic acts of leadership. So you're not a leader, but from time to time, you act and you take leadership. And that could be 5 minutes a day, could be once in a week, could be half a day, I don't know, but you take leadership. So let's talk about practices. One thing that I've been working on for the last couple of years is this stuff, which I don't have time to describe in detail, but it will happen, because I'm starting to write about it. So these are this is a model that I put together, and this is a set of practices that are intended to support leaders who want to shift their own consciousness. And by shifting their own consciousness, they can shift the consciousness of the entire organization. But they are practices. Brief description. There are three main categories: intent, interaction, and awareness. Now, you can also look at this stuff in another way. You could place yourself right in the middle of the two circles, okay? And on this side, I'll use the pointer. Then on this side, on the right-hand side, the more you go right, the more you go into the domain of what we call external leadership, which is the way you influence others. And the more you go to the left-hand side, the more you go into the domain of internal leadership, which is the way you lead yourself, for the very simple reason that you cannot lead anyone if you cannot lead yourself, first of all. So internal leadership and external leadership, you need both. And then you can see here, you have these three practices in interactions: word, actions, and ethics. In the intent domain, you have systemic mindset and heuristics. Then again, I cannot go into the details of all of this, but I will talk about one of these three. And then in the awareness domain, you have insight, concentration, self-awareness, and organizational gardening, which are three different levels of awareness. One is being aware about yourself, another is being aware about your organization. I'll tell you the metaphor of organizational gardening. Now, let's take a nice garden like this one. And in this nice garden, you might have plants that you like and plants that you do not like. And that happens, it's a garden, okay? But the plants that you can see depends on the seeds that were planted and that were not visible up to a certain point. So gardening is not just about taking care of what you see, but it's also taking care of what you don't see. Seeds, for instance, okay? Planting the right seeds, removing the wrong seeds. So I have this model, which is part of organizational gardening. This is a practice. It's something that I invite leaders to do when we work together. And so here you have two axes. It's a classical quadrant. You have unmanifested. I'll use the pointer. You have unmanifested here and manifested. So basically below this line, this is like the level of the dirt, the ground, okay? So down here you have seeds, unmanifested. Up here you have plants that are manifested. And some of these plants or seeds you might not like, or you might like. Very simple, right? And then you have different strategies. So for instance, things that you do not like, you don't want to happen, and they haven't happened yet, you want to prevent. Things that you don't like, but they're visible, you want to reduce. Things that you do like and are visible, you want to support. And things that might be there and you would like that, you want to promote. And you can place that on a nice time scale. Now, when I say things, I'm talking about behaviors. I'm talking about any kind of dynamic in the organization that you want to either promote, support, reduce, or blah, 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 blah. Okay? And this is what some people did in one of my workshops. I have a 2-day workshop on this stuff and Agile leadership and blah, 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 blah. So this is an exercise that some people did. They decided to place on this quadrant different things that they wanted to address. And so basically down here, some people, you have training here, okay? Apparently, they are not doing enough training for some reason, or they're on time, and they want to, I don't know, I don't remember the color code, what it was, but anyway, it's something that they don't want to happen again, and it might happen. Here, they have probably this is good training, this is bad training. This one, I'm sorry, it's in Italian, but anyway, this one is, our technology may become obsolete. So that has not happened yet, but we are becoming aware that maybe 1 year, 2 years from now, if we don't do something, our technology might become obsolete. You have a seed that might grow and produce a plant that you do not want to see, obsolete technology. Now, by doing this kind of exercise, they create awareness. So this is not a planning tool. Don't get confused by the time axis. It's not a planning tool, it's an awareness tool. It helps people to get a better understanding of what is actually happening or what might happen or what they don't want to happen or what they want to change, and then they will plan accordingly. So it's one example, but this is a classical practice that can help leaders think in a different perspective, not in the perspective of projects, schedule, timeline, deadline, objectives, and so on, but in a more organic way, in a more ecosystemic way. So I think we are done with the time, and I think I'm done with the talk, in fact. So just a brief recap. What time is it? Yep, almost on time. So brief recap. I hope you will remember not only these 3 things from what I told you, and I hope you will remember whatever is useful to you. But these 3 things are important to me. So what I suggested is that modern high-performance organizations are based on a new kind of consciousness, because consciousness is what creates the organization, both its culture and structure. The other thing is that leadership is what can make the change to a different consciousness level. And the other thing I want to point out is that at the moment, you don't see many organizations working with this kind of paradigm. You don't see many organizations whose leadership intentionally creates an ecosystem that lives by itself. You don't see many of these things, but the ones that we see are the ones who stand out. And that's the point. The ones that we see, even though they are a small minority, they are the ones who stand out. And so just think about it. And I'm done. As I mentioned, I very much like if we have a nice chat afterwards, and also if you want to keep in touch. So just connect with me on LinkedIn if you want to, provaglio LinkedIn or /Twitter. I have a newsletter. And have fun and all the best. Thank you. Thank you. Do you take questions now? I don't know.
Thank you very much, Andrea. Just at least one question about the talk.
I don't know what you usually do.
I don't know. I just wanted to know how will you get the leaders to give up their leadership?
I never try to make people do something, but I create the conditions for them to see something different.
Okay.
Yeah.
To do itself. Okay. Thank you very much, Andrea.
Thank you.
It was nice to have you on stage. You had a tablet there. We have another tablet here for your breakfast.
So that's cool.
Of Constance. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.